I'm writing the story, it probably goes like this. Caleb works out some kind of deal with his dad. All four of them can stay in the Kama-Ina Termite and Pest Control offices on Queen Street when it's closed. Well, John, he sees some jewelry over at Mike's offices. So this kid decides that he's gonna take a little something with him, a Rolex watch. But within a week, Mike Miskey realizes his watch is missing. So Mike posts a reward, a bounty, if you will. $5,000 for anybody who can help me get my watch back. Word makes it back to the jeweler who bought this watch from Johnny. The jeweler calls up Mike Miskey. Mike pulls out a picture of John and Ashley. And now Mike, he's on the hunt. Johnny's gotta pay for what he did. John decides he's gonna sell his Honda Civic. He needs money. Dan hears that John's trying to sell his car.
Yo, I heard you selling your Honda. Can I come by and take a look?
Some people might say that Dan did something to the car. John just didn't know what was about to happen. Just then, none other than Mike Miskey himself rolls up all quick in a big beige truck. Well, they beat Johnny that day. Mike rolls up, the three goons jump in his car, and they dig. Charmaine makes the police report. This was the beginning of the end for John Fraser. See, Johnny's friends, they all say the same thing. John was a good kid. He's just easily influenced. I got a son like that. You know, John didn't have much, and he was no match for Mike. John Fraser just wasn't expecting anything else. He still didn't know that this whole thing was a setup. So sadly, John, still needing money, he called Dan back after the cops left. He calls the very dude who set him up, and Dan picks up the phone. Dan's like,
Bro, what was that? You trying to set me up? You trying to take my money?
and Johnny's like,
No, bro. I wasn't trying to set you up. Listen, that was all about me. That had nothing to do with you. I wasn't trying to take your money. I wasn't trying to set you up. Are you still interested in the car?
you guys remember something. The car is now broken. Who buys a broken car that wasn't broken as a part of the original arrangement? It wasn't broken when he first looked at it. Something is wrong here. But John just couldn't see it, and he never figured it out. Think about something. They had to push it home. The car doesn't work. But anyway, Dan's like,
Yeah, bro, I'm still interested in the broken car. But since it's broken and you can't drive it, let's meet up at the County Skate Park. I'll bring the money, you bring the title. I'll come tow the car later.
and John really needs the money. And when you need something like money that bad, you start slipping. You don't see the obvious right in front of your face. John was caught slipping. He couldn't see the forest through the trees. John still didn't realize that this kid is involved. He still thinks that he's still got a chance of selling this car. He was blind to what was happening. So John agrees to meet up with Dan at County Skate Park. Problem is, he needs a ride. But what he doesn't realize is, and we will find out later, that that may be what saved his life. Because he can't drive, he's got to ask for a ride. So Charmaine, who's a young mom with her baby in the car seat and their Nissan Quest, she drives John and his girlfriend Ashley up to the skate park. She's just trying to help a kid who's got no money, he's really got no place to stay, he's trying to sell his car. Now remember, Charmaine, she's no dummy. She just witnessed John get mobbed 4 hours ago in front of her house. So she's already sketch about this whole situation. All right, so when she pulls up to the skate park, it's already dark outside, the lights already came on at the park. She actually sees some people sitting in a car inside the parking lot before she gets there. So she doesn't pull all the way inside the lot because it's just a one lane to get in and get out. She doesn't want to get trapped. She has the wherewithal to see that she might get trapped as she pulls in. She just parks at the mouth of that driveway. All right, so while Charmaine stays in the car with her baby and John, Ashley gets out of the car. And when she starts walking, Dan appears from basically nowhere, from the shadows. As Dan walks up, he's texting on his phone. He's preoccupied with his phone. So Ashley says to him, "Here's the title, you got the money?" Dan doesn't answer her right away. And he starts acting strange. He's fumbling with his phone. He's like trying to talk to her, but he's texting somebody. It almost seems like he's stalling. So Ashley asks again, "You got the money?" "I got the title." Dan's like, yeah. I got the money. Hold on. Dan starts texting on the phone all frantic and he starts looking around. That's when Ashley realizes what's happening. Turns around, digs out, starts running towards the van, hops in the van. She's like, it's a setup, let's go, let's go. And just then, Kalana Freitas runs up out of nowhere from the darkness. Ashley jumps in the van just in time, right when she closes the door. Then this big van pulls up out of nowhere and wedges them in so they can't go anywhere. They're stuck between the van and the curb. And Charmaine, she sees the driver of that van. She cannot believe her eyes. Behind the wheel of that van is none other than her classmate, John Stansel. Well, unless they hit that van or drive up on the curb, they're stuck. In that very moment, Kalana Freitas reaches inside the van and grabs the steering wheel. This is a full-blown carjacking, y'all. But they picked the wrong chick that day. Because this chick, Charmaine, she's pretty much a gangster. Plus, she's a mom with her baby in the backseat. Charmaine guns it. busts a Yui, runs up the curb, almost runs over Kalana Freitas. He's this close to getting run over and dying. Charmaine gets out of that trap, but this is just the beginning. Charmaine busts a Yui, gets out of there, takes that van, pedal to the floor as fast as that van will go back to the Kahikili. Kalana Freitas hops in the van, John Stansel busts a Yui, and chases Charmaine with her baby, Ashley, and John in the van all the way out of the park. Charmaine takes a right on the Kahikili, and now they're in a full-blown high-speed chase. John Stansel keeps trying to run her into the guardrail. She's in that first lane. John Stansel pulls up next to her, keeps trying to run her off the road, get her to go into the guardrail so that she stops. He's trying to wedge her in like he did at the park. At one point, Ashley throws a Pepsi can out of the window at the van, trying to do whatever she can to stop them, because they're all scared to death right now. From the Kahikili, they head Kailua bound on the Like, and they're running all the lights. John and Kaulana start throwing stuff out the van at their car. They make it all the way to Windward Shopping Center. And thank God they see a motorman parked in the shopping center with his blue light on. So Charmaine, she busts a right into Windward City towards the motorman, but John Stansel, he keeps heading Kailua bound towards Castle High School. So Charmaine them drive up to the motorman, and as luck would have it, Charmaine actually knew this guy. He's like a friend of the family or something. So she gives the officer the description of the vehicle. He does some awesome police work. Turns out that van was registered to one Kama'aina Termite and Pest Control Incorporated. 2 attempted kidnapping robberies in the same day, both tied to Mike Miske. All right, so after that incident, John and Ashley, they move out of Charmaine and Kalani's house. Mike Miske knows where John and Ashley were staying now, so that's changed. That spot's too hot. On top of that, Charmaine and Kalani got kids. It was just too much. Now, John, Ashley, Caleb, and Delia, they all stay close through this whole time. I mean, they're not talking as much because people are having babies and finding places to stay, but they're still friends. And when John and Ashley move out of Charmaine and Kalani's house, they move in with John's family in Nanikuli. John and Caleb, they even start this car club with some friends, and they called it Mad Motor Industries. That's when Caleb and Delia, they got pregnant themselves. Their lives changed. So Caleb and Delia, they just move in with Mike. And Mike's giving them money. And then Mike even bought Caleb this super nice truck. But that's when something happened. We don't really know, but something happened between Delia and Mike. Now, nobody knows what it was, but we know that Caleb didn't like it. And then Caleb came at Mike, and they had it out. Mike kicks Caleb and Delia out of the place that they were living, and he takes Caleb's truck away from him. Now, Caleb's salty. He was done with Mike. I don't know what happened, but whatever it was enough. Caleb was done. Thing is, Mike had gotten Caleb that job in Matson. But whatever the case, Caleb's making enough money on his own now. That's his job. So Caleb flexes on him a little bit. Caleb goes and buys Delia this super nice Tacoma, and even buys himself this really flat hatchback. Plus, some time had passed and he kind of misses his friend John. They hadn't really been talking because life was crazy. They weren't upset at each other or whatever, but they just hadn't spent much time together. Now that he's done with Mike, he misses his friend. Mike didn't want Caleb to be friends with John, and everybody knew it. And that's when this story takes a whole nother turn. Caleb, he's on his flex right now. He bought his cars in spite of Mike, and now he hits up John Fraser in spite of Mike.
John, you gotta see my new car, bro. Let's connect.
And John was excited to see his old friend again.
Yeah, bro, let's do it. Where you wanna meet?
All right, so November 17th, 2015, basically 2 weeks after I seen John and Caleb at that Halloween event in Waikiki. John and Ashley are hanging out at Windward City Shopping Center. Caleb calls John and says,
bro, meet me up at the Chevron.
Which is right next door. So John and Ashley, they drive over to the Chevron to wait for Caleb. It's like 7:45 p.m. Now they had a few minutes before Caleb was supposed to show up. So Ashley, she's like, yo, I'm gonna take the truck, go say hi to my dad real quick. I'll be right back. So she leaves John at the Chevron, knowing that they're gonna be looking at Caleb's new car for a little while. And she goes to say hi to her dad who lives right around the corner. She's only gone a couple minutes. Now she's coming back down Eva bound on Kaneohe Bay Drive from the Bayview Golf Course towards Windward City. She sees them driving this really dope hatchback. super happy, smiles on their faces. Murdered out D-series, cam gears, exhaust. It was beautiful. They both just had these really big smiles on their faces. They were always happy driving cars. Best friends reunited. So as Ashley pulls into the gas station where she originally dropped off John, Caleb and John are actually passing her going the opposite direction. And she parks inside the Chevron to wait for them to come back. I mean, you can hear them driving. It's super loud, every pass they made. And now on the third or fourth pass, they're heading ever-bound into Kaneohe, and they redline it. It's getting dark, and Caleb, he had the lights off on the car. Ashley, she can hear the car coming back down towards where she's at. She even gets out of the driver's seat of the truck and scoots over into the passenger seat to make room for John. She takes her slippers off and just sits there waiting for him. But here's another point where everybody's life changes. You see, Caleb, he had this thing. He liked to beat the cars that were crossing over their lane. I don't know if it was an adrenaline thing. It's got to be, right? I mean, anybody who races cars, you get it, I guess. But that night, there was this truck. It was heading Kailua bound, turning left onto Makalani, across the oncoming lanes that John and Caleb were racing in. The driver never saw Caleb. The car was black. He had no lights on, and he was probably going 100 miles an hour. And who knows, things might have been different if the truck had just turned across the lanes and took off. But at that intersection, as you turn onto Makalani, there's a dip. It's kind of that trench that guides the water when it rains heavy. It's called a gutter. Well, as you cross that gutter, you gotta slow down. So the truck driver slows down, and that's when it happened. Weeks later, when John's memory came back, he said all he could remember about the accident was that it was all acceleration, no brakes. And the last thing he remembered was Caleb saying, "Bro, hold on." The truck was broadside, and Caleb almost beat it. But the car hits the very tip of that front side bumper of that truck. And the truck spins out like a coin in the center of the intersection. Ashley's still in the truck waiting for John. She heard the engine redlining, and then she hears the crash. Metal on metal. As soon as she hears it, she freaks out, hops out of the truck. She runs across the street. She can see them now. They were off the road in the bushes. They flipped that car. It was a mess. It was a nightmare. Just metal, wires, blood, glass. John was still in the passenger seat. Caleb was in the driver's seat. John never wore his seatbelt. It was just his thing. Everybody knew it. He just never put the seatbelt on. But somehow John was still in the car. Still in the passenger seat. His face was all cut up and he was choking and gargling on his blood. Witnesses say John's girlfriend Ashley actually sucked the blood out of his mouth because he was choking on it. And the family, they lived so close to the accident. Family said they actually heard the crash. They heard the screeching of the tires and they heard the sirens. Ashley calls her dad. He comes to the scene. Ashley's dad calls Mike Malone because he knew that somebody had to tell Mike that Caleb was hurt and that he was hurt bad. Both John and Caleb both got rushed to Queens because Queens was the only level 1 trauma center. Nobody was sure that either one of those guys were going to make it. Shortly after they got to the hospital, Mike Miske shows up with his half-brother John Stansel. They hadn't seen John Stansel since he tried to kidnap and rob them over at the skate park. John Stansel actually came into John Fraser's room and looked at him. This is right about the time that Caleb's uncles start saying that John was driving, not Caleb. But remember, Ashley saw Caleb driving the car with John in the passenger seat. At the hospital, Mike's trying to convince the doctors that the mark on Caleb's chest was from the passenger seatbelt, but it wasn't. The EMTs on scene even wrote in their report that Caleb was behind the wheel. So that's when all that started. Both John and Caleb, they were in the hospital for a long time. John's head just wasn't right. Something was wrong in his head. When John came to, he didn't even know that he'd been in an accident. Now, when John was in his hospital room by himself and someone would come to visit him, he would tell everybody that when they weren't there, that Caleb would come and visit him. But Caleb was in a coma still. In the hospital, they would tell the families not to talk about the details of the accident because this was a head trauma. And if the person couldn't remember what happened, they don't want you placing those memories in his head by telling him things about the accident. They need to remember this stuff on their own. And it took a while. John, he was in the wing of the hospital where they do the physical therapy, and he was trying to get his memory back. And his leg was pretty beat up too. But John, he would recover. It was slow, but he would get better. He was in the hospital for a month. And when he was good enough to go home, John and Ashley, they'd move in with John's family so that they could help him recover. He had a lot of recovery to go through. He was on medication for the pain, and he had 4 huge scars on his face now, and he was embarrassed about them. But Caleb had it worse. Months had passed. Thanksgiving came around. Caleb, he wasn't getting any better. But then one day something weird happened. Caleb woke up from his coma, and the first thing he did was ask for this girl, but it wasn't Delia. He had apparently been seeing another girl when he wrecked. It was her that he asked for. Things must have been on the rocks with Delia because people already knew. This was a known thing. There was this photo floating around of Caleb picking out Christmas trees with this girl. So it was still kind of a secret, but people who were close to them knew. Caleb had finally woke up, but he had developed an infection in his leg, and they put Caleb in the ICU. And that's when Delia had their baby, when he was still in the ICU. And now there's this rumor, I'm not sure how true it is, but Mike, because he was Caleb's father, he had a choice to make. Either amputate Caleb's leg or he dies. And apparently Mike had refused to let them cut Caleb's leg off. But the doctors weren't lying. The infection was spreading. And on March 12th, 2016, Caleb Miske Lee passed away. It was a sad day for everybody. John FRASER took it really hard. And for some reason, John wasn't allowed to go to Caleb's funeral. And that really broke John's heart. He loved Caleb. He had really thought Caleb was going to get better. He got better, but it never happened. They held a ceremony to spread Caleb's ashes in the ocean. And Mike and the Miske family basically iced John for a while. But here's where the plot thickens. Now, the FBI would later call the family up. They already knew about the Rolex, and John's friends and family always wondered why they never arrested Mike for that. Ashley was scared to death. At the time, Mike was seemingly untouchable. The stuff that he got away with, the people that he knew, he could hire hitmen, chase you through the city with absolutely no recourse, not get caught at all. He could say what he wanted, he could do what he wanted. That would terrorize the community. He'd done it numerous times. Everybody knew. Mike was untouchable. Now remember Rick Calhoun. This wasn't the first time the community thought Mike had already disappeared somebody. And it would take balls to be the one to try to break the cycle. Ashley was scared, but that girl testified in front of a grand jury against Mike Miske and his goons. Now later on, people would start to see Mike and Delia together, and they started hearing about their relationship. And then Mike even transferred all of his assets into Delia's name so they could be protected. But the FBI had already targeted Delia as a part of this conspiracy, and there was nothing he could do. Now, guys, we don't know what happened to John, and we really don't know how deep Mike's pockets or Mike's Rolodex really is. So this story is not over. There's so much more to this that we haven't even seen. Probably a reason why everybody's been seeing Catherine Kaloa around the courthouse. But in the end, the heroes of this story, the story that you just heard, the story as if I were to write it, the heroes of this story are those 2 girls. Those police reports they made, they just might be the key that unlocks the mystery that Mike worked so hard to hide. This wasn't an info charge. This wasn't just a criminal complaint. This was grand jury. If you testify in a grand jury, they need you. God bless those girls, because of all the people who could have stood up to Mike and his thugs for terrorizing a community and terrorizing a culture. Of all the people who could have said something, it was a young mother and a teenage sweetheart.